Hello everyone. Today's my lecture is on autonomic nervous system. Now in this system we learn about the organization of the sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. Then in details we learn about the functions of the autonomic nervous system and autonomic neurotransmitters, receptors, drugs and autonomic reflexes, and the differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. Then lastly, we learn about the applied aspects of the autonomic nervous system. Objectives. So after studying this chapter, you should be able to give the answers of the following: craniosacral outflow, thoracolumbar outflow, and role of the autonomic nervous system in the regulation of the cardiovascular functions, and role of the autonomic nervous system in the regulation of the gastrointestinal activity, then neurotransmitter of autonomic nervous system, then functions of the sympathetic division of autonomic nervous system, functions of the parasympathetic division of autonomic nervous system, then differences between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, differences between the somatic and autonomic nervous system, autonomic receptors, then applied aspects of autonomic nervous system. Then describe the ways that the autonomic nervous system contributes to homeostasis. Now classification of nervous system. So at first the nervous system that is divided into two parts, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. And peripheral nervous system that is again divided into somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. And autonomic nervous system that is divided into sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. So anatomical division of the nervous system. So the nervous system that is broadly classified into two anatomical divisions, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Now, what are the functions of central nervous system? Central nervous system that includes two parts, brain and spinal cord. Then why it is known as central nervous system? Because it occupies the central axis of the body. So it is known as central nervous system. Now, what are the functions or what are the parts of the peripheral nervous system? So peripheral nervous system that consists of two parts, sensory division or afferent division and motor or efferent division. Now central nervous system that collects the information from the environment and from the visceral organs through sensory division. So sensory division that conducts the impulses from receptors to central nervous system, and peripheral nervous system that communication lines between the central nervous system and rest of the body. So after collecting the information, the central nervous system that compare and contrast the information to the previous experience. So brain that acts as a integrative and control center. Then motor division that conducts the impulses from the central nervous system to effector organs like muscles and glands. So muscles that is included in the somatic nervous system. and that is a voluntary. So conducts the impulses from central nervous system to effector organ, skeletal muscle. And in autonomic nervous system, that motor division that conducts the impulses from CNS to cardiac muscle, smooth muscle and glands, so that are considered as a visceral organs. So autonomic nervous system that is mainly concerned with the visceral organs or vegetative function. So it is also known as autonomic vegetative nervous system. Now the autonomic nervous system that is again divided into two parts, sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. Now in sympathetic division, it mobilizes the body system during the activity through fight or flight reaction. So it is also known as catabolic nervous system. Now parasympathetic nervous system that conserves energy and promotes the housekeeping functions during the rest. So because of that, the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes it is also known as anabolic nervous system. Now again, the central nervous system that collects the information through the afferent division from the periphery, and central nervous system that from the central nervous system output from the central nervous system to periphery through efferent division, and through the efferent division impulses goes to somatic nervous system through motor neurons, and the effector organ is skeletal muscle, and through efferent division impulses goes to autonomic nervous system, and effector organs are smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, exocrine glands and some endocrine glands. Through sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system and autonomic nervous system, it also includes enteric nervous system. An enteric nervous system that lies entirely within the wall of the digestive tract. Organization of the nervous system. So nervous system that acts as a control network within the body. The specialized cells that constitute the functional unit of the nervous system are known as neuron. And the neurons are responsible for the reception and response to changes in the internal and external environment. It is estimated that the human nervous system is composed of more than 100 billion neurons, which are linked together in a highly intricate manner. So, the various parts of the nervous system are interconnected, but for the conveniency of the description, the nervous system can be divided anatomically and functionally into different divisions. So, this is the figure of parts of the central nervous system. This part that includes, that is a brain, and this one is a midbrain, pons and medulla oblongata. This is cerebrum and cerebellum. Now this one is a spinal cord and it includes cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral and coccygeal segment. So it occupies the central axis of the body. So it is known as central nervous system. So central nervous system that includes brain and spinal cord. So brain that is divided into three parts: forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. So forebrain that includes telencephalon and diencephalon. So telencephalon, that is the anterior part of the forebrain, and diencephalon, that is a posterior part of the forebrain. So this one is a telencephalon, anterior part of the forebrain, diencephalon, that is a posterior part of the forebrain. Now upper two-thirds of the diencephalon, that is known as thalamus, and lower one-third is called hypothalamus. Now hindbrain, that includes metencephalon and myelencephalon. So hindbrain, that comprises pons, medulla oblongata and cerebellum. Central nervous system, that includes brain and spinal cord, and it is formed by neurons and supporting cells known as neuroglia. Structures of the brain and spinal cord are arranged in two layers, namely grey matter and white matter. This is the figure of cross section of spinal cord. This one is a grey matter and this one is a H-shaped. So the grey matter, that is formed by nerve cell bodies and the proximal part of nerve fibers arising from the nerve cell body, and the white matter, that is formed by remaining part of the nerve fibers. Now in the brain, the white matter is placed in the inner part and the grey matter, that is placed in the outer part. But in spinal cord, the white matter, that is the outer part, and the grey matter, that is the inner part. Brain, that is situated inside the skull, and it is continued as a spinal cord in the vertebral canal through foramen magnum of the skull bones. Brain and spinal cord are surrounded by the three layers of the meninges, that are known as outer one is dura mater, middle one is arachnoid mater, and inner one is pia mater. So this one outer is dura, middle one is arachnoid, and inner one is pia mater. Now the space between the arachnoid and pia mater, that is known as subarachnoid space, subarachnoid cavity, this green one, and the space that is filled with the fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. Brain and spinal cord are actually suspended in the cerebrospinal fluid. Now about the peripheral nervous system. So peripheral nervous system, that is the part of the nervous system which lies outside the central nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system, that consists of peripheral nerves and the ganglia associated with them. And the peripheral nerves attached to the brain are called cranial nerves. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and those attached with the spinal cord are called spinal nerves, and there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So this one is a spinal nerves, and it includes ventral root and dorsal root. This one is a dorsal root ganglion. Now about the spinal segments. So this one is a cross section of spinal cord. So this one is a posterior median sulcus and this one is an anterior median fissure. This one is a dorsal horn, ventral horn, and intermediolateral grey horn. In centrally there is a central canal. This one is a grey commissure and this one is an anterior white commissure. This one is a posterior funiculus, lateral funiculus, and anterior funiculus. Now the spinal cord, though it is a continuous structure, can be considered to consist of 31 spinal segments and each segment giving attachment to the rootlet of the ventral and dorsal root of each spinal nerve. Each spinal nerve, that is a mixed nerve, formed by the union of the two roots, a dorsal root and ventral root. There are certain differences between the dorsal nerve root and ventral nerve root. Now all the sensory fibers reach the spinal cord through dorsal nerve root, and the ventral nerve root, that is composed of axons of the motor neurons present in the ventral gray horn. And each dorsal nerve root that is marked by swelling, that is known as dorsal nerve root ganglion. This one is a dorsal nerve root ganglion or spinal ganglion. Dorsal root ganglion, that is composed of T-shaped unipolar neuron with peripheral and central processes. And the ventral root also contains the autonomic fibers originating from the intermediolateral gray horn of spinal cord. The 31 segments of the spinal cord correspond symmetrically to 31 spinal nerves. 8 cervical segments that give attachment to 8 cervical nerves. So, these are 8 cervical segments that give attachment to 8 cervical nerves, and 12 thoracic segments that give attachment to 12 thoracic nerves. 5 lumbar segments that give attachment to 5 lumbar nerves, and 5 sacral segments that give attachment to 5 sacral nerves, and 1 coccygeal segment that gives attachment to 1 coccygeal nerve. Now about the spinal nerves. The 31 pairs of the spinal nerves are named according to the region of the vertebral column from which they emerge. Because the spinal cord is shorter than the vertebral column, the spinal nerve root must descend along the cord before emerging from the vertebral column at the corresponding intervertebral space, especially those beyond the level of the first lumbar vertebra. Now about the cranial nerves. These now have their cell body in the brain. There are 12 pairs of the cranial nerves. Some are afferent or sensory, and some are efferent or motor, and some containing both these components are known as mixed nerve. So first one is olfactory nerve, second optic nerve, third oculomotor, fourth trochlear nerve, fifth trigeminal, sixth abducent nerve, and seventh facial nerve, eighth vestibulocochlear nerve, ninth glossopharyngeal nerve, 10th vagus nerve, 11th spinal accessory nerve, and 12th one is hypoglossal nerve. So this is a very short information about the organization of the nervous system. So before we start the autonomic nervous system, we have certain information about the nervous system. Now introduction about the autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system that collects the information about the changes that take place in the internal environment, means internal viscera, and interprets these changes and guides the action and gets the plan executed with the help of the smooth muscles of viscera, cardiac muscle, secretory epithelium of the glandular tissue, which are the effector organs of autonomic nervous system. In other words, The autonomic nervous system is responsible for activities of the organs of digestion, circulation, excretion, respiration, reproduction, as well as of adrenal medulla, sweat gland, lacrimal gland and salivary glands. It also controls the activity of the smooth muscles of iris, ciliary body and erectors pylorem. The term autonomic, that is derived from the word auto, means self. Nomos means control. So emotional responses of the body and responses to environment that occur without the conscious knowledge of individual. These responses are therefore called autonomic responses and that are executed by the autonomic part of the nervous system. The function of the autonomic nervous system can be broadly categorized into 5 parts. First of all, maintenance of the homeostatic conditions of the body, regulation of the visceral activities, smoothing body's responses to environmental changes, coordination of the body's responses to exercise and stress, and assisting the endocrine system to regulate the reproductive functions. Now scientists contributed. W. H. Gaskell and J. N. Langley laid the foundation for the study of the physiology of autonomic nervous system. Walter Holbrook Gaskell was the first scientist who thoroughly investigated the innervation of the cardiovascular system and viscera. He discovered the cardioaccelerator nerve and laid the foundation for an understanding of autonomic nervous system. Another scientist was John Newport Langley, analyzed the functional significance of autonomic nervous system in vertebrates. He was the first scientist to classify the autonomic nervous system into sympathetic and parasympathetic division, indicating their anatomical, physiological and pharmacological relations and characteristics. Then what are the differences between the somatic and autonomic nervous system? Now the sensory division of the somatic nervous system that collects the information about the changes that takes place in the external environment, while autonomic nervous system that collects the information about the changes that takes place in the internal environment, means the visceral organs. So first of all about the somatic nervous system. So this side, left side, that is a somatic organization, and in this side there is a sympathetic system or autonomic organization. Now in somatic polysynaptic pathway at least 3 neurons are involved. Afferent or sensory neurons with its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion. So this one, that is a somatic afferent fibers and its cell body inside the dorsal root ganglion. And this one is a connector neuron or interneuron in the dorsal horn of spinal cord. By means of its axon, transmits the impulses to the efferent neuron. So this one is a efferent neuron or motor neuron. With its axon which transmits the motor impulses to the effector organ or skeletal muscle. It consists of a single efferent neuron. So somatic nervous system, it consists of only one motor neuron between central nervous system and effector organ. The nerve fiber of the efferent neuron that leaves the central nervous system and passes without any synapse to the skeletal muscle, and it innervates the skeletal muscle, and the neurotransmitter released at efferent or motor neuron endings is acetylcholine, and it always leads to muscle excitation. Inhibition takes place centrally through the participation of inhibitory interneurons. Now about the autonomic nervous system. So in autonomic nerve supply to viscera, three neurons can also be recognized. Afferent neuron proceeding from the internal organ, and its cell body lies in the dorsal root ganglion. And central process is sent into the gray matter. Then interneuron, it is known as preganglionic neuron. So this one is a preganglionic neuron, and that is situated in the intermediolateral gray horn of spinal cord, and it acts on synapse and the synapse on the cell body of the postganglionic neuron. Now, postganglionic neuron, whose cell body is always located outside the CNS, and its axon ends on the visceral effector. So each preganglionic axon diverges to an average of about 8 to 9 postganglionic neurons. Therefore, the autonomic output is diffuse, and it has two efferent neurons, preganglionic neuron and postganglionic neuron. So, first effector neuron has its cell body in the central nervous system. The synapse between the two efferent neuron lies outside the CNS in a cell cluster that is known as autonomic ganglia. So this one is a autonomic ganglia. The nerve fiber passing between the CNS and ganglia are called preganglionic autonomic fibers, and those passing between the ganglia and effector cells are known as postganglionic fibers. Now, autonomic nervous system that innervates the smooth and cardiac muscle, glands and GIT neurons. The neurotransmitter released between the pre and postganglionic fiber is acetylcholine, while the neurotransmitter between the postganglionic fibers and the effector cell depends on the component of the autonomic nervous system, and it can lead to either excitation or inhibition of the effector organ. Inhibition occurs peripherally through a direct influence on the effector. List of reference book: Guyton, Ganong, Ekejain, Indu Khurana, G.K. Pal, R.L. Bijlani, and Snell's Clinical Neuroanatomy, and Sibyasachi Sirkar, and the prep manual for undergraduates, Vijaya Joshi, and also from the internet. So thank you very much.